A lot of people that have a traditional financial plan, and they may have a lot of assets, but they can't touch any of it. Even though technically it's a liquid asset, but they cannot use it because all of it's tied toward their income stream. And so what we want people to understand is, what money do you actually have available to use to touch during retirement?
Hello and welcome to Simplify Your Retirement with Stephen Strickland from Wise Wealth. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Paul. Great to be back.
Fantastic to have you here, and we're thrilled to have in studio with us Melissa Daigle.
Absolutely. This is our first guest of this season. We've tried to certainly bring on guests in every season that we've had so far. So episode 3 here of season 5, we've got a guest with us. Melissa, have you been on this podcast before?
I have, but not since we started videotaping.
Okay,
so
that's
this
true.
is new.
You're the first, that's right, video guest that we've had on here as well. So that's awesome. But I thought you'd been on the podcast once before. So you can go back and listen to that podcast and find out the intro to Melissa. But Melissa is a certified financial planner. She's on the Wise Wealth financial planning team. She works directly with me, with all of my clients, and does a great job. Is in meetings pretty much all day, every day, meeting with clients. And so she's definitely in the thick of things. And so certainly from the standpoint of talking about what types of planning that we do, the types of plans that we offer, I really thought Melissa would be great to have on our show today because she's certainly very involved in all aspects of the financial plans that we do, but especially in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the nicknames I have for her that I tell clients, we'll save that for later, is the reason why she's here today. So.
Okay. A little teaser. So don't leave. I mean, you just got on the show. You better stay with us.
But today we're taking that deeper dive into what we introduced in the last episode. Last episode, we talked about the 7 areas of planning that we do within the overall Simplify Your Retirement Plan, right? So the plan as a whole is the Simplify Your Retirement Plan, but there's 7 areas that we focus on.
Yes.
And will you remind those that maybe it's the first time they've heard it, but will you remind them the 7 areas of planning that the Simplify Your Retirement Plan covers?
It's so important because, like we talked about last time, is a lot of people confuse having a plan for having a product or a portfolio. We say in order to have a real plan, it covers these 7 areas, and we break that down into 2 major components. Let's call it. One is income planning. One is impact planning. And when you combine those 2 areas together, you get what we really want to get people to, and that is freedom planning. The freedom to give and to serve and to enjoy life like never before. So you don't get to the 7th area, which is freedom planning, until you do the first 6. And that's broken down. There's 3 areas of income planning. There's 3 areas of impact planning. And so we talked about this last time, Paul, that we start with the income planning first.
Yes.
Impact planning comes next. And then freedom. So the impact planning involves tax planning, legacy planning, insurance planning. But what we're focused on in the early parts of this season is really going to be talking about the income plan. And the income planning aspect of our overall Simplify Your Retirement Plan, which is, there's 3 areas there. There's liquidity planning, there is actual income planning, and then there's growth or investment planning.
Absolutely, yep. And so what's exciting about that is as we dive into each of these 2, there's a lot that we can talk about, but you referenced it last time. There are rules for each area, right? Because they align with our 3-bucket approach. So there's the liquid bucket, the income bucket, and the growth bucket, just like there's liquidity planning, income planning, growth planning. So they align, but each of these have rules that we have to follow in a sense. And so we're going to talk about the rules, and then, as we always say, the plan determines
The products.
The products,
That's
yes.
right.
And so we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
What types of products then fit within liquidity planning? So we're going to start there.
Anybody who's been around the podcast for a while or read the book or been to the class, they know that we deal with 3 buckets. And when we talk about the 3-bucket approach to retirement planning, we're talking about the income plan.
Yep.
We're talking about the first 3 areas of a simplified retirement plan: liquid, income, and growth. We call them buckets. And the way to really look at these 3 buckets is you fill them up one at a time. And so you can look at it from, top to bottom. So you take all of your entire assets and you fill up the liquid bucket first. Whatever money you don't put in the liquid bucket gets to go into the income bucket. Whatever money does not go into the income bucket is available for the growth bucket. So it does matter. So when we talk about, liquid, income, and growth, and we're talking about income planning, we don't just start with the growth bucket or the income bucket. It has to go in this order. So that's why today we're going to start with the liquid bucket or liquidity planning. And, liquidity planning certainly is important for everybody. It really doesn't matter what phase of investing you're in. So we talk about the accumulation phase, preservation phase, distribution phase of investing. Everyone needs to have money that is liquid. And so, Melissa, for people that are listening to us, for the first time, perhaps, or you're just not even familiar with some of these terms, when we talk about liquidity planning, what are we talking about here?
We're really talking about the money that you need to use in the next 5 years.
Yep.
So
exactly. Something that's available.
Easy to access, available, not necessarily tied up for the long term.
That's right.
And we even kind of break that 5 years down, and we can talk about that when we get into
Absolutely.
the products. So there, if you think you're going to use it in the next year, we're certainly not going to put it into something that's not going to mature for 2 years.
Right. That's good. Yeah. So, you bring up the whole idea of the 5 years, and certainly the 5 years is an important concept that we use here in our firm. And so, we'll jump right into that. So we're talking about if you have money that you're going to need within 5 years, we normally are going to stick that in the liquid bucket. If you don't need the money for 5 years or longer, we're going to stick that money in the growth bucket. And so, Paul, when we talk about liquidity planning, 2 things I want to say about that up front is certainly there is the liquid bucket. That's where most of the liquidity planning goes into. But I also want to mention to everybody that when we talk about 3 buckets, the growth bucket is also liquid. So I want to make sure we do talk about that later. So of the 3 bucket approach, the income bucket is the only one that we would say is not liquid. Whatever money we stick in that bucket is no longer available. We can't touch it because if we touch any money in that bucket, our income stream is going down. The 2 buckets that are liquid are the liquid bucket and the growth bucket.
And I think one of the things to talk about too is even liquidity. There's technical liquidity, and then there's true liquidity.
Yeah.
Right. And so some people get hung up on that because they look at the income bucket and they may have technical liquidity in a product, meaning they can get at the money when they need it.
Right.
But we'll say that you don't have true liquidity in the income bucket because if you go in and take money out of the income bucket, what happens to your income?
Yeah.
It goes down.
Right.
And so you don't have true liquidity there.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I talk about this in the revised, updated version of the book, and that is if there's a trick to retirement income planning, one of the tricks is to have as much of your money available for you to use during retirement. We see a lot of people that have a traditional financial plan, and they may have a lot of assets, but they can't touch any of it. Even though technically it's a liquid asset, but they cannot use it because all of it's tied toward their income stream. And so what we want people to understand is what money do you actually have available to use to touch during retirement? And the goal is to make sure you have as much of that as possible. There's something, to have your income stream guaranteed, to have your income stream protected and have a lot of assets available to use, that's the goal. And so a lot of this planning that we do for people is ultimately trying to figure out how much of these assets can you actually not touch, because that's your income stream, and how much can you touch. And to us, this seems simple, but for the majority of people, they tend to be scared, right, to touch any of their money because they're afraid over retirement, if I use this money, we're not going to have money for long-term care. If I use this money, we're going to run out of income. Is that what you've seen in the past?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
People are concerned that, because it's all in one bucket. We'll call it one bucket. Some portfolio managers, some people are going to retirement and they think they're going to keep their money liquid, draw an income from it, and grow it in one portfolio. And we always tell everybody there is no such thing as one portfolio that can keep your money liquid, draw an income stream from it, and grow it.
Yeah, and they want it to cook and clean for them too as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and Stephen, people also think that because they're retiring, they have
Yeah.
to be extremely conservative in that growth
That's
bucket.
right.
But the income bucket and the liquidity bucket, that's what allows the growth bucket to grow. And if we
Correct.
fund those correctly, then that's where the long-term growth is going to come. So,
Absolutely. And that's why, again, we go in this order.
that's right.
Liquid, income, and growth. And Paul, I think you asked the question maybe 10 minutes ago now about the liquid bucket rules. So I haven't forgotten. I want you to know, just because we talk about certain things doesn't mean I forget the question. Okay. So the rules, so we call them rules because it's like, then if I'm supposed to go in this order, liquid, income, and growth, how much money do I put in the liquid bucket? Because I already said we have to start there. And the main thing people need to know is you want to put enough money in the liquid bucket. You want as much money as you want in there and need, but just know that every decision I make to put in the liquid bucket means it's not available for income and it's not available for what you just mentioned, Melissa, to let it grow. So it's important that we fully fund the liquid bucket, but we also want to be careful what we put in there regardless of your risk tolerance. And that's
right.
really what you're saying. And that is most people tend to be like, I want to be conservative with all of it. Well, if you follow our planning and you follow our logic here, you'll be able to take a risk with that other money. So I'll just start off by saying, the liquid bucket is money that you need available and it's money that you need safe. We're not going to take a risk, which is what Melissa said a second ago, with the money in the liquid bucket. So there's really two reasons why someone would keep their money liquid, available, safe. The first one is for an emergency fund. And so, when we talk about an emergency fund, how much money should someone have in an emergency fund? I'm going to be interested in hearing your answer to that question.
Well, it depends on if you're in retirement and following the Wise Wealth Plan, or if you're in the accumulation phase, right? Because if I'm in the accumulation phase, I'm going to want 6 months of my living expenses in an emergency fund.
Yep.
But if I have a Wise Wealth Plan and my income is guaranteed, what emergency fund do I need to replace that income, right?
Perfect answer. And I agree totally. During the accumulation phase, 6 months of your living expenses saved, that's the number. So sometimes people ask us in retirement, how much money should I have in the emergency fund? Well, 6 months. Well, at this point in time in retirement, you're not worried about losing your job. You're not worried about, paying the bills. Your income is secure. So therefore, it is a very subjective number. And I always tell my clients that there is no right or wrong answer to this question. Just know that whatever number you put in here can't get used for the other two. So you want to fully fund your emergency fund, but don't overfund it. We've got clients that, they cannot bear to look at their, checking account that does not have less than 100,000 in it. So that's fine. If you want 100,000, some of them want 20,000 because they want the rest somewhere else. But that's why it's important to understand too that the growth bucket, even though it's another conversation, that is liquid. And I think that helps our clients understand that just because I lower my emergency fund number here doesn't mean I still can't get to money somewhere else down the line. You can. And what you mentioned earlier, Melissa, is the key, and that is 5 years. So number one is how much money do you always want there just in case for an emergency? And you really got to think about, in retirement, what could an emergency be?
Say tree falls on your car and you don't have insurance, you only have liability.
That's right.
So.
Or you have a deductible. So you're really, there's not a lot of major emergencies.
Right.
And the problem with the emergency fund is that typically we're talking about a bank product, which, and the whole idea is not to earn money on it. It just needs to be there. And so, it's not going to be earning that much, which is why we say figure out the number, fully fund it, don't overfund it. Because technically you're losing money due to inflation. But that's not the point. You just want to make sure it's there. So make sure you have enough money in your emergency fund to cover any of your deductibles. You always want to have money that's there, so you don't have to ask anybody for it. You don't have to make a trade for it. You don't have to wait 3 days for it. It's always there and it's available.
Exactly.
What number helps you to sleep at night?
That's it.
That's the key. So that's number one. That's the money. When we're talking about liquidity planning, first we're talking about an emergency fund. And then the second, we're talking about money that you have plans to use within the next 5 years. And I like to use the terminology, it is a known or a planned purchase or expense. All those words matter. It's known or planned within the next 5 years. I'm not talking about one of these days we're going to go here or there. I know we're going to do it. And it's within 5 years. And so an example of planned purchases or expenses, what comes to mind?
Vehicles. And
Yes.
I say that because I often have to remind people when you're talking about this 5-year bucket, they'll tell me, well, we don't really have anything planned in the next 5 years. So I ask them, how old is your car? How many miles are on it, right?
Yeah.
Because I've even had to remind my husband of that.
Yeah.
That's a planned purchase for us within
That's
the next
right.
5 years. So.
That's right. That's a big one.
Yeah, so when I talk to most people, it comes down to vehicles, if they remember.
Yes.
Big trips,
Yes.
like the trip of a lifetime, because we're heading into retirement.
Right.
And this is what we've always wanted to do.
Yep.
Or some sort of house
Yep.
repair or remodel.
That's right.
Yes.
I really think it comes
Yes.
down to those three.
Yes.
Normally it involves vehicles, house repairs, remodels, and trips.
Yep.
And so it's important to think about that. And the reason why we want to put that, we use that in liquidity planning in the liquid bucket is because we want to keep that money safe. We want to keep it free from market risk. We also want it to be available. So when we talk about a simplified retirement plan that leads to peace of mind, we're talking about a simplified retirement plan that leads to confidence. We want our clients to know that that planned purchase or expense is going to happen. And the way we make sure that it happens is we get it out of the market. We get it out of things that are, we put it in something that's going to be safe, liquid, available so that they know it is going to happen. And so it just leads to peace of mind. So we're talking about 5 years or less. But 5 years sometimes is a long time for someone to just, let's say, keep their money safe and not earn anything. So when we say liquidity planning, when we talk about the liquid bucket, we're not saying automatically that means you're losing money. Automatically that means it's just not going to earn any money. No, we want to earn money.
Right.
And so when we look at the liquid bucket, 5 years or less, no risk or low market risk, and safe and available. I also look in that bucket, and now we can go further down and say, okay, some of this is 1 year or less.
Right.
Certainly, the emergency fund is 1 year or less. It always has to be there. So that's the one you're going to take the least amount of risk with. You're basically going to use, savings accounts, checking accounts, and so forth. Somebody may have a planned purchase or expense within 1 year. Then we're just talking about really the bank.
Right.
We're not talking about earning anything. There's more of an opportunity to lose than anything else. So you just want to make sure that's there. Then I look at it and say, well, if this goal is 1 to 3 years, maybe there's things we can look at besides just the checking account. And if it's 3 to 5 years, maybe there's other things that we can look at besides just the checking or savings account. So let's talk about that just for a little bit because certainly within 5 years, but 5 years or less needs to be in here, and it needs to be what we would call a cash type of account or a cash alternative.
That's right.
In cash alternatives, it means CDs, money market accounts, money fund accounts. It could be fixed annuities that have terms of 5 years or less. It could be special savings accounts. So let's just start first with CDs and money funds. And maybe even for our own clients that are listening to the podcast, they're not aware that we have these available even for us. But so there's our clients and there's a whole world in general through Charles Schwab, which is our custodian that we use here. So Melissa, you're the expert on this.
Yeah.
You're looking at CD rates and money fund rates every day. Is this?
I talk about the nickname I have for her.
Oh, okay,
it's
good.
It's the CD guru.
The CD
it.
guru. Okay,
That's
you
what I
guys,
say.
you
need
guys
to talk.
waited. You
Yeah.
waited on this podcast just to hear that.
I
Stay
tell
tuned.
people,
Don't
I
go
say-
anywhere yet.
Talk to Melissa. She's the CD guru. I know how to spell CD, but that's about it.
All right. Yeah.
Who would have thought that my banking career 23 years
That's
ago
right.
would come in handy these days?
You didn't
but it
know.
does,
Started in
right?
banking and then financial planning. So the CDs, money funds, I guess the difference between those two, when would you look and recommend a money fund for someone versus a CD?
A money fund is really when we want absolute liquidity. You might need the money in 2 to 3 days. Right? So we want to make sure that we have it available. The worst case scenario using our money fund is let's just say it's the Friday before Labor Day weekend, because that's the longest thing that could ever happen, to use a 3-day weekend. And you call me on Friday and you say, Melissa, I need some money, and I'm going to liquidate it, and I can have it to you by Tuesday following the holiday. So that is the longest time period you would be.
So it's pretty accessible.
Yeah, you wouldn't have the funds sitting in your bank account.
Next business day.
So
Is what
next
you're saying.
business day.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I
So
gotcha.
it's best. Well, first of all, when you look at your bank rate of return, a lot of people have a money market account, but we're looking at rates that are typically about 0.5, if not better than what you're going to get at the bank. So a lot of banks some of our local banks, honestly, they don't even come close to touching Schwab. But, so right now our money fund rate's about 5.22.
5.22, and this is just on cash.
On cash.
Yes, and this is another reason why we tell people, make sure your emergency fund that you really need to get the same day.
Yes.
Leave that in the bank. But if you
That's
can
right.
even wait 1 day to get it, these money funds at Schwab, currently based on the day we're recording this,
Yes.
obviously it'll come out a little while later, but today they're over 5% just on a money fund.
Yes. And just like your bank money market, that rate's going to fluctuate.
It fluctuates.
Based on what interest rates will do. And Stephen, you don't know this, but I have all the girls in the office opening money funds and using it.
Okay.
So
All right. Well,
So,
good. There's really no reason to leave too much money in the bank. There's a reason not to, especially when you can connect, let's say, a Schwab personal brokerage account to your checking account.
That's right.
You can move money from the checking account to the brokerage and vice versa. And like Paul said, basically 24 hours.
That's right.
So unless you have some need where you has to be, sooner, and there's no penalties to get in or out.
No penalties, no fees.
No
And,
fees.
The thing that makes it so accessible, we make sure anytime you're opening a money fund, we're going to link your bank account to that fund. So,
Is it just the girls in the office, or can Paul and I? Can Paul and I get in this
Only
deal too?
girls are
I'm
allowed.
just wondering. Yeah, is this you guys? Are you guys getting in at 5.2, and we're getting?
You
in
all
at,
know how busy we are, so even though
Yeah.
we're small and in the same space, we hardly ever get a chance to communicate. So I'm telling you now.
Yeah, thank you. Yes,
you
I
guys might
appreciate
want to
that.
take
Yes.
advantage of this too.
Yes. I got you. So then some of our clients will go the money fund route, more liquid than, let's say, the CD. But the CDs
Yes.
are the advantage of the CDs. Then you're locking in that rate, where the money
That's right.
fund is great. But like you said, it can fluctuate daily, monthly, everything else. You don't know what you're going to get 6 months from now.
Right.
Whereas the CDs have the advantage of a known rate for a fixed period of time.
Right. So that's the advantage of the CD. We have no idea where our interest rates are going. So should they go down with a CD, you've locked in that rate for a longer term, and
Yep.
you don't have to worry about a drop in that interest rate. So you'll get
CD
more of
rates are how long term? So let's say, what's the shortest term someone can buy a CD?
3 months.
3 months. So you buy a 3-month
So
CD.
you can do 3 months up to, you can go all the way up to 3 years, but there's typically a break-even point.
Yeah.
So the break-even point is where CD rates start going down. So right now it's about 18 months.
Okay.
So rates increase up to 18 months, but if you start going out beyond that, then they start to decline.
So if you're concerned about interest rates, you don't want to do the money fund, you have at least 3 months. You can do 3 months. 3 months to 18 months here is the sweet spot for CDs.
Yes.
Someone right now looking at, people that are listening, you just have to call us, call
Right.
Wise Wealth. Obviously, ask for Melissa if you want to know what the current CD rate's on. She's staying on that, but right now they're above 5 for
Yes.
an 18-month.
They're running between 5.2 and 5.3, everything from 3 months all the way up
Okay.
to 18 months.
So literally, you can lock that in for 18 months and know you're going to get that rate. Paul, the advantage of that is obviously there's a lot of them. One is, as opposed to a money fund, you're going to get that all 18 months versus the day to day of the money fund. Number one. Number two, when I think of that in terms of bonds. There may be people listening to the show today that buy, municipal bonds. These rates in these CDs are way better, not subject to fluctuations of interest rates, market risk, and those sorts of things. And so again, would you put your emergency fund in an 18-month CD? I probably wouldn't. Certainly, you can get out of them. You just lose out on the interest.
Well, our CDs actually trade.
Okay,
so the difference between a bank CD and using a brokerage CD is that when you buy a CD in Charles Schwab account, you can get out of it at any point in time you want to, but you're literally selling your CD in the open market.
Right.
So if interest rates go up and I have a CD that I want to get out of before my maturity date, I risk that I could sell it for less than what I put in.
That's right. So it's a brokered CD. So the advantage is there's liquidity, but disadvantage is still subject to what the current interest rates are.
That's right.
So when you're looking at a CD, you certainly want the plan would not be to buy a CD and sell it 3 days later.
No.
Like we've had sometimes happen. So the portion of the CD really is going to be more for a long. You want to hold it for that term ideally.
Right. As long as you hold it until maturity, you're going to get your principal and the guaranteed interest rate back, and they are all FDIC insured.
So there you go, Paul. So the one thing is some people think automatically, well, liquidity means a checking account, savings account. It's not going to earn anything.
Yeah.
We tend to think of that for, the emergency fund, certainly. You want no questions asked. It's there. It's not earning anything. But anything longer than, let's say, 6 months or even a year, you want to start looking at some of these cash alternatives.
Right.
Yeah.
2 of them we've already talked about, the money fund and the CD.
Yep.
Then if we get beyond, let's say 2 years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, now we're talking about maybe taking on less liquidity. Anytime you give up, we always talked about this in investing. You give up something. If you're going to give up liquidity, you're probably going to get a better return. If you're more interested in liquidity, you're probably going to get less of a return. So the longer, if you know the trip is in 4 years, if you know the day you're buying the car is in 3 years, there's no problem tying up a product that matches that term because more than likely you're going to get a better rate of return. So, I want to talk to you, Paul, about, fixed annuities. A lot of times we deal with annuities from an income planning standpoint. And certainly from our firm standpoint, we use annuities mostly in the income bucket because it's the only thing that can guarantee you an income stream you cannot outlive. But it's not the only reason why annuities have value.
Exactly. And so, there's many reasons why an annuity might fit into a plan, but in the liquidity aspect of it, the liquidity planning phase of it, it would be, again, if you have a longer time frame.
Right.
Some of the advantages to that are the principal protection. It's obviously the named beneficiary. If something were to happen in the intermediate, you can also lock in a good rate. I mean, so typically, again, you give up something, you give up a little bit of liquidity, meaning I'm going to have a surrender penalty if I get out early.
Yeah.
If I keep it to maturity, I don't have that penalty, but I'm going to get a better rate for a longer period of time.
That's right. So to me, it's a known, if you have a known period,
Yep.
and it's pretty set, that's where these come into play. And the difference between, what Melissa was saying a second ago and what you just mentioned there is in the CD, you can get out of it. It's a brokered CD. You may get where your principal back, you may not. Where in a fixed annuity, we know if you get out of it early, you will get a penalty. So it's like for sure that's the date, but you're also probably going to get a better return than even the CDs, and certainly can go longer than 18 months.
Absolutely.
That's the advantage.
Yeah. So and that's where the break-even point doesn't happen then.
That's right.
Because you can lock in a rate for a longer period of time. But even though with the annuities, they do have some liquidity generally that a CD doesn't. With the CD, true. It's kind of an all or nothing deal almost. It seems like, where you're going to sell the CD, whatever it is, the open market, and you get whatever it is. Here in annuities, generally you can take out at least a percentage, or maybe the interest you've earned. There's different ways depending on the product where you can get at it. And I know a lot of times people's biggest concern with locking something up is what if, right? And generally the what if is a health-related issue.
Right.
So a lot of annuities have waivers of the surrender charges for catastrophic events.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean that you're completely locked up. But again, it comes back to the when and the why.
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
that's why the plan determines the products.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why over time, sometimes we're a conservative, firm by nature. And so in other words, we're going to take a risk with our clients' assets that they can afford to have a risk with. 5 years seems like a long time to be safe with it, but we're not talking about just letting it earn nothing. There's things that you can do to make sure it's there for peace of mind, but also continue to really earn. And it's not just, there's not just one tool in the toolbox. It's not just leave your money in the bank. No, let's find out within the 5 years, is it closer to 4 or 5, or is it closer to 6 months or less? Very important to know. So cash and cash alternatives. But when we're looking at the liquid bucket in particular, the first of the 3 buckets, the first part of planning when it comes to the full plan, if you think about freedom planning, the freedom to give, serve, and enjoy life, we know that whatever's in, that's why liquidity planning starts first. We want to make sure, hey, I know I have enough money in the emergency fund. I know the car is already set and secure. I've got a fixed rate. It's a principal guaranteed. It doesn't matter what happens in the stock market between now and then. That's going to happen. This trip is going to happen. You talk about freedom. You talk about peace of mind. You talk about confidence. That's why we start here. Then we move on from there. There is one other type of account that we can help our clients with. It's called a federally insured cash account. Yes. It's called FICA. And basically what that is, I call it, it's kind of like a fund of CDs.
Yes.
It's a program where, I think the FDIC insurance on this goes up to like $25 million. It does. It is a massive amount of money. So in other words, if someone has a lot of money, obviously at the bank, it's $250,000, per person per deposit. So if someone has a lot more assets than that in the bank, you can go to, and you still like FDIC insurance. This is where you can go to a FICA account. And right now the FICA accounts are paying 5%. It's a little less liquid, I would say, than the money fund, but it's still liquid.
Right.
You still tie it to your checking account. The money goes back and forth, but I don't know. Maybe it takes another day longer. Maybe it takes 48 hours to get to it.
The way a FICA account works, you can literally open it online yourself, and we direct you with that. And then you can go in and request your money movement yourself.
Right.
So it does take maybe about a day longer than what it does to get it from Schwab.
Yep.
But it's invested in hundreds of different banks.
Yes.
So you can literally have, 500 banks that you own a piece of.
Yeah, all these community banks around the country.
Right.
So their story basically is using all these community banks. So obviously when you give money to a bank and buy a CD, you're giving money to that bank.
Right.
And that bank is taking that money and lending it out to those communities. So some people like the connection with a FICA account because they know they're putting their money in something and those banks are using it to promote these communities that may not be as prosperous as others, those sorts of things. So if someone wants FDIC insurance, that's where the FICA account comes in. And you're buying one fund, let's call it, but in that fund, they're buying a bunch of different CDs for you. And like you said, the one advantage to that potentially might be is you're kind of more in control of that. Like you said, we can help you set that account up, but you're the one making those decisions to get out or move in. Whereas the money funds, the Schwab CDs, the fixed annuities, you need us to help you do those things.
Absolutely. Those are literally going to be a phone call to talk to us about it. And anytime you want to make any movement with those. And one other thing about the FICA account, Stephen, is they did change their minimums. So it's $100,000 to open a FICA account.
Okay, that's good to know.
But there are options. But again, we go back to, because people hear rates.
Right.
And I know people's tendency, they get excited about rates.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to the planning.
Yes.
The plan determines the products, not the other way around.
Right. And how do you have a plan? There's questions that have to be answered. When do you need this? What is this for? And that's why we always tell people too, that's why you don't go to a robot. You don't use an online advisor. AI can't do this. They have a brain, but they don't have a heart. And so we want people to talk to someone like Melissa. What is this money for? When do you need it? Let us now go out and find out what is the best available product at that time, because they're certainly constantly changing. And there's lots of cash alternatives that come up from time to time. And we're aware of these. And so certainly we're going to try to match someone's goals with the right product. The plan determines the product. But first, ultimately what goes in the liquid bucket, going back to the rules. Number one, the money you need for an emergency fund.
Right.
Number two, any known or planned purchases or expenses within the next 5 years. If it's known or planned within the next 5 years, we'll try to find out when that is, match the product to that time frame.
Right.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what you said earlier, too, which is we want it to be fully funded, but not overfunded. Why?
Yes.
Because we know these rates sound good. 5%
Right.
is a great rate.
Oh, yeah.
But is it always that way?
No.
Just
No.
even a couple
Right.
of years ago. I mean, what could we get in
It would
CDs?
have been tough, right?
Right? And so we need something that is going to, over time, continue to earn and beat inflation.
Right.
That's right.
And these liquid products are not always going to.
That's right.
So we don't want it to be overfunded just
Absolutely.
because we have good rates.
And going back to this concept of overfunding, the main reason we don't want to overfund it too is because whatever we don't put in the liquid bucket now is available for the income bucket. And then we're going to determine when we get to the income bucket, and we're talking about that coming up here soon in the income planning episode of this season, we're going to talk about using the least amount of your assets to produce the income that you need. Because whatever doesn't go in the liquid bucket goes to the income bucket. Whatever we don't use here goes to the growth bucket. Growth bucket, therefore, I'm going to jump ahead, is for money we don't need for 5 years or longer, but it is liquid. The purpose of the growth bucket is to refill these other two over time. So, if we end up using the emergency fund, where do we get the money to refill it? If we end up buying the car, where do we get the money to refill that? That's what the growth bucket is for. It is liquid. It's available so that I can take money. Now this money is no longer 5 years or longer money. It's 5 years or less money. Each and every time we meet with our clients, it's pretty much the same question. We're doing a review. Here's the question. Do you have any known or planned purchases or expenses in the next 3 to 5 years? We have to know, because then that's what determines what we're going to do with the money in the growth bucket. We may have to transition some of that. That's the reason we would change the allocations in the growth bucket, not because of some short-term, 5 years or less, phenomenon in the world.
Right.
That's why the growth bucket's 5 years or longer. We protect ourselves from being reactionary in the market. We protect ourselves from emotional investing, because we know the only money at risk is money we don't need for 5 years or longer. Anything in 5 years or less was already in the liquid bucket. You're sleeping at night. We're all sleeping at night too.
Yep, absolutely.
And the other thing I think is really important, and Paul mentioned this, is we have to remind people, why don't we use the liquid products in the growth bucket? Well,
Right.
because they have a job, and their job is for liquidity, not to outpace inflation, because they're not going to. Over
That's
the long
right.
term. And we have to allow the growth bucket
That's right.
to do its job to beat inflation. So we
Absolutely.
can't use these products there.
We just talked about earlier in the show, you give up something to get something.
Right.
So in other words, if I know I have 5 years in the market, going back to what you said at the beginning of the show, is we can take on more risk than we normally would. So now all of a sudden in the growth bucket, our goal is not a 5% rate of return. It's 8.
Right.
It's something higher. Now, why can that be the goal? Why can that be the objective? It's because we know we're not going to touch that for 5 years or longer. I'm going to invest differently. I'm not looking for liquid assets in the growth bucket per se. And when I say liquid assets in that context, safe, guaranteed, protected, those kinds of things, because I can take on the risk. And, jumping ahead there, the goal of the growth bucket is to use the least amount of risk for the rate of return we're trying to get.
Right.
And so it all works together.
Yeah.
We say this to everybody. We talked about this last time, Paul, in the last episode. Some people want to go directly to impact planning. I want a tax plan. I want a legacy plan, where we say first do this. Start with the income plan first, which starts with the liquid bucket. It all works together.
Yes.
That's why this is so important to have this discussion. So then once someone understands the liquidity play and how it works the liquid bucket, it's something we're always going to be able to go back to.
Yeah, and again, this is that field level view. We talked about it last time, where it's like this episode sounds exciting, but it is still just a piece
One
of
of the
everything.
7.
And so going back, if you didn't watch it or listen to it before, go back to episode 2 to get the overview of how it all works together, because it is just a part of the overall plan.
Yeah. I think of it like a puzzle. So, you know how when you work a puzzle, I have a system. You know, I'm going to get all the pieces out. I'm going to find my edge pieces, put the edge together. Then I'm going to match up the colors and work each color at a time. And if you don't follow our process in the order, it's like dumping all the pieces out and trying to put the puzzle together without having any process to it at all.
Absolutely. There's a lot of pieces, but it's got to go in the right order.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's where it leads to ultimately where we're trying to go. And that's why we said last time, this is not you don't come in and, hey, one visit, we're going to get it all. We're going to put all 7 areas together. No, this is a relationship. This is a process. It takes time, but we're here for the long haul to help people get to that goal where they're ultimately free to give, serve, and enjoy life. Melissa, we love having you on the team.
Thank
We loved having you on this podcast.
Yeah,
It was great. Thank
absolutely.
you for being with
you.
us today. Appreciate it.
So, and again, this is part of the plan. So if you don't have a Simplify Your Retirement Plan, how do you get one?
Yeah, the best place to go to is to our website, wisewealth.com. You go to wisewealth.com, and on that page, there will be a contact us section there. Reach out to us, contact us. The first thing we typically do is start with a 15-minute phone call, gather some information, let you know what the process is, then we go from there. But certainly we have classes. We have a book, Simplify Retirement. You certainly can request that by going to the website or calling us at 816-246-WISE, 816-246-9473. You can request the book. We actually have live courses that we teach. If you're in the area, in the Kansas City area, you go to wisewealth.com/events, and you can see any of the live courses that we're teaching as well.
Absolutely. And so this is just part of our ongoing education. This is part of how we educate our clients and people who may have never interacted with us before. So certainly we have this available on YouTube with the video, and we have it on your favorite podcast channel. So subscribe. When you subscribe, you'll know when the next content comes out. But also, it becomes easier to share this with family and friends. So you're sitting there having coffee, talking with someone, they talk about a trip they're going to be taking in 3 years. You should be thinking, wow, that's a known or planned purchase in the next 5 years. Maybe you share this with them and have them be able to get in touch with us for liquidity planning as part of the overall Simplify Retirement Plan. So again, thank you, Stephen, for leading us for this, for the podcast, for all that you do to educate our clients. Thank you, the CD guru, Melissa.
That's getting added to my title.
Oh, right, exactly. Running out of room on your business card.
Thank you for joining us today. And again, the last thank you goes to you, our listening and viewing audience. We wouldn't be here without you. This is the reason we do it, and you're the reason that we're here, and you're the reason that this podcast exists. And so thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. And again, thank you for all that you all do day in and day out to help people have the freedom to give, serve, and enjoy life. This is Paul Brock for all of us here at Wise Wealth, reminding you that financial peace comes from having a plan. And we'll see you next time.